Tonight on Business Live, Auditor General recovers about 2.2 billion cedis from public sector after discovering financial irregularities there between 2017 and 2020. Also, Institute of Economic Affairs joins calls for the exemption of rural banks, individual bondholders and pensioners' funds from debt exchange program.
Again, because they pick the savings of rural people, poor people, and then they invest it in government bonds. So why are you seizing their monies, which belong to poor people? And so they should be excluded.
Ahead, we engage former chairman of Parliament's Finance Committee on Debt Exchange Program, Dr. Eric Osei Esipe. And Association of Ghana Industries describes level of utility tariff increments for water and electricity as a serious threat to employment prospects and the survival of businesses.
Saying that if industry really needs to survive, then utility tariffs has to be managed so much so that they do not affect the overall cost of production.
I am Maame Esi Thompson. Let's settle now for the details. The Auditor General, Johnson Ekwia has recovered a total of 2.21 billion cedis from the public sector following financial irregularities between 2017 to 2020. This is about 46.13% of the expected recoverable amount. There's more in this report.
The amount recovered is out of 4.76 billion cedis recommended for the recovery for the period under review. According to the Auditor General's report from 2017 to 2020, the Audit Service also saved the state a total of 145.08 million cedis from payroll certifications between 2018 and September 2022. The report said 1.282 billion cedis has since been recovered and deposited into an Auditor General's recoveries account at the Bank of Ghana opened in June 2022. The biggest amount recovered was 1.644 billion cedis from tax irregularities. A total amount of 421.4 million cedis, representing 19.06% of total recoveries, was made in respect of loans, advances, and indebtedness. Again, 131.13 million Ghana cedis was recovered as cash irregularities. The Auditor General commended the Public Accounts Committee and Parliament for their continued support.
The Institute of Economic Affairs is the latest to call on government to exclude rural banks, individual bondholders and pension funds from the domestic debt exchange program given their relative financial vulnerability. According to Director of Research at the Institute, Dr. John Kwache, the government should rather cut its expenditure. He explained that there is a need for a special tax for extractive companies and super profit tax for telcos and banks. He spoke at a presser.
In terms of exclusions, we are supporting exclusions for treasury bills. So that one, we accept that, we endorse that. And then individuals, they were initially excluded, then they were brought back. We are saying that they deserve to be excluded because most individuals, they have a high financial vulnerability, so they should be excluded. Pension funds, I think it was initially included, but subsequently excluded. It should continue to be excluded. Now, rural banks, again, because they pick the savings of rural people, poor people, and then they invest it in government bonds, and some are under compulsion, under monetary policy prudential requirements, even to invest in government bonds, the rural banks. So why are you seizing their monies, which belong to poor people? And so they should be excluded. If anything at all, deal with the big banks, the commercial banks. Okay. Now, then tax measures also. We had proposed in the 2023 comments on the budget that government should take certain tax measures because, especially on the company side, that we don't tax companies enough. That's, they work in the areas where the economy is booming, extractives, telcos, banks. And as a developing country, that's where you don't go and tax poor people whose incomes are so tiny. But for some reason, we try to avoid that. So we said, first, e-commerce, we said, why don't you introduce an e-commerce levy? This will be addition to the e-levy anyway. E-levy is from Momo Transact, but we are talking about commercial trading. And then indigenous companies, we propose that we should have a separate tax regime for them. We are asking the tax rate to go up. Different from extractive companies, that we said increase their tax rates and then even impose a super profit tax on them. Telcos, also we say increase their tax rates, impose super profit tax on them, as well as banks.
Meanwhile, Dr. John Kwache is asking government to abolish the 3-year moratorium on the repayment of principals.
Government should shorten the maturity period from 10 years to 15, from 15 to 10. Now, when you do that, you lessen the burden, the pain on bondholders, the impact on the economy, and so on. So, 2023 to 2033, that's what instead of 37, okay? Now, you have first some poor pensioner who says he's 77, saying that by 2037, he will be dead. So that's the point we are making. People can't wait till 2037. Now, adopt a new coupon regime. The coupon regime that they have said 0% 2023, 5% 2024, then 9 to 10.65 for the outlying years. We are saying that put them between 8 to 12%. Of course, the longer dated instruments will earn more, but that's we think a more acceptable kind of. We are also saying that the 3-year moratorium on the repayment of the principal, the fact that government says for the first 3 years, I'm not going to pay you anything on your principal. We are saying it should be abolished. Again, given the benefit of the fiscal measures that we have suggested, we say, government, go and implement those fiscal measures. You will make savings from there and use that to mitigate the DDE so that we can have this regime that we are proposing here.
Government has made what it describes as significant progress with the domestic debt exchange program to encourage banks to fully participate in the program. This is because the Association of Banks has agreed to sign the deal subject to the proposed terms. There's more in the following report.
Some of the proposals that have been put on the table that will result in the commercial banks participating in this deal includes government agreeing to offer 5% as coupon payment for 2023. Government has also agreed that it will offer 9% coupon payment on the 12 new bonds that will be issued by the Finance Ministry. Another significant move that has been proposed by the state will eventually result in the commercial banks participating in the deal is that government has agreed to remove all clauses in the exchange memorandum that empowers the Republic to vary the terms in the exchange program in the future. The Ghana Association of Bankers was, however, quick to add that the agreement that it will reach with government is, however, subject to the approval of individual bank shareholders and their board of directors. Or for some, since the commercial banks were the main reason for the extension of the domestic debt exchange program, government can be said to have made some significant progress in getting a very important stakeholder in participating in this domestic debt exchange program.
Now, government is still struggling to secure the buying of individual bondholders despite some amendments made to the offer. But in all these, what are the alternatives? We are joined in the studio by Dr. Maame Esi Nyamekye. He's the former chairman of Parliament's Finance Committee. Dr. Maame Esi Nyamekye, we are grateful for your time here in our studios. With these discussions going on, the negotiations with the domestic debt exchange program, first of all, what's your take on it?
I think it's a condition precedent for the IMF program approval by the board.
Right.
So we have to do it somewhat. Mm-hmm. The external, we've given indication of suspending payments on the external. So there's not much to haggle about over there. On the domestic front is where we have challenges. Government intends to restructure 137 billion of our debt. By taking out pension funds, that's 27 billion of the 137 gone. Because the pension funds held about 27 billion of the debt. Mm-hmm. So then you are left with 110. Now, originally, the individual bondholders were not part of the 137.
Exactly.
So having taken out the pension funds, government then brought in the individual bondholders, whose total, if you add the collective investment schemes, will be 15.5 billion. Mm-hmm. I side with the individual bondholders. I think these are persons who've saved monies over time for their retirement, for taking care of their families, and to include them in this debt exchange will be too difficult to take. So I think government should rethink the inclusion of the domestic bondholders, take them out, likewise the collective investment schemes. So if you have done 27 billion, you do another 15.5 billion, that brings us to about 90 billion. The banks, insurance companies, asset management firms, and all the rest. Government should be able to tweak its numbers, go back to the fund and say that the landing that you gave us, the 55% debt to GDP ratio by 2020, it was very steep.
Right. So
why don't we readjust the numbers and say do 65% or even 70% by 2028?
Right.
So that's what I would advise. I'll go back to the IMF and tell them that, yes, we've listened to concerns back home. It's difficult for us to achieve the target set by 2028. And so if you give us some space, then we should be able to carry this out.
Well, with your explanation, exempting individual bondholders, right, you've also asserted that government should tweak its numbers. What will be the alternatives in bringing in additional income to make for the full billions they are expecting?
So on the revenue front, I think we've increased VAT. We seek to bring in some revenues from property rates and the like, tightening a few things. So we've maxed out, if you like, on the revenue front. But the expenditure controls, we could rationalize a bit over there, but the savings thereof will not be huge, maybe 5 billion cedis if we go full throttle. Go to the IMF and tell them that the negotiations we did in October, which said that debt to GDP ratio should come down to 15%, debt service of 18%. We cannot meet those targets. That's why we call it IMF negotiations with the fund. Mm-hmm. We cannot, because we cannot carry out measures which would bring difficulties on our people.
Right.
We have to put a human face to the debt restriction. I think there are people at the fund who understand the issues, and then they know the kind of fragile economy we have, the impact on our citizenry, and they would also bend over. So there's nothing wrong with going back to the fund. It might delay the whole process by another 2 months, but we have to get it right.
Right.
Once and for all.
Okay, but looking at the pace of negotiations so far, what do you make of it? Because we have a deadline of the 1st January to meet. What do you make
that
of it?
deadline was set by government, okay, for the debt exchange. I think if government announces tomorrow that individual bondholders have been taken, I will still meet the deadline because to all intents and purposes, the banks have agreed. The banks have agreed to some
review terms.
Yeah, so if the banks have agreed, they carry about 40% of the debt that is being restructured. So if the banks agree and then we go ahead with that, taking out the individual bond, it will throw us off the 55% landing by 2028. But that 55% debt to GDP target was set by the IMF for us. We can go back to them and say that this 55 we cannot achieve because of the individual bondholders, collective investment schemes that we have exempted back home. And
do you think government is rushing the process on government side?
The process has to end at some point. Mind you, we have a staff level agreement, it has to go to board. And that's why I said this is a prerequisite.
Right.
If you don't get this debt restructuring out of the way, the staff level agreement will not go to board. So what would you do? Are you going to hold the staff level agreement, delay with the debt restructuring up to June, July? No. So it has to end at some point so that this can go to the board.
Well, before you go, government is pushing for a debt cancellation. Is it prudent? Can it be secured?
These are negotiations with the G20 common framework. That's not under our control. So the G20 countries will sit and then look for how to relieve us of some bilateral debt. This one does not affect the Eurobond and then the commercial loans. This is just bilateral debt. Ghana, China, Ghana, US, Ghana, UK. Those are the ones that are considered under the framework. So we'll go a begging. They could agree. They've done it before with HIPIC. And so there's no harm in trying.
There's no harm in trying.
Sure.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Maame Esi Nyamekye. He is former chairman of Parliament's Finance Committee. We'll take a breather here. We'll be right back with more. The Association of Ghana Industries has described the level of utility tariff increments for water and electricity by the PURC as too high for industry to bear, particularly at this time. It argues that though utility companies need to recover costs to sustain their operations, the effect of the utility increase could be dire for both industry and utility companies. Greater Accra Regional Chair for the AGI, Chonam Akbalu, spoke at the marketplace.
Together with the Commission, have agreed that we are okay with a quarterly review of tariffs.
Okay.
So it's not at all for them to review tariff quarterly. But our concern is the rate of increase. Because if you look at power, for example, electricity, it's gone up within the past 6 months, over 56%. And that is threatening the very survival of our industries. Look at water. Water for our beverage sector, for example, has gone up by over 48% in the past 6 months. And we're saying that this clearly would make running industries in Ghana extremely difficult. And so, in the light of this, in as much as we are not against review of tariffs, we're just saying that the rates are too high, and that what we mean by review is not to come and within 6 months go by over 50%. Power, for example, constitutes about 30% of the entire production cost. So if you're increasing power within 6 months by 56%, it affects the very foundation of the survival of the business. So what happens over time is that most of our companies are unable to compete in the market, a market which has a lot of cheap imported products, that so locally manufactured will have to compete with some of these products, and they are unable to compete because the rate at which we have to increase the price to be able to survive are so high. So we're saying that if industry really needs to survive, then utility tariffs has to be managed so much so that they do not affect the overall cost of production.
That's it for this edition of Business Live. Thanks for your company. We'll leave you with tips on Money Lab.
Hello, welcome to today's episode of Money Lab. My name is Jifa. In the previous episode, we spoke about the benefits of insurance, and today we are looking at a few principles that govern insurance. The first one is insurable interest, and this simply means that you should have a financial interest in the thing you are insuring or in the person you are insuring. You must stand to suffer a loss should an event occur. For example, you can insure your spouse because you have an interest in your spouse, your parents because yes, you do have an interest, and you can insure your children. Because of insurable interest, you cannot go and insure your neighbor's house. Do you understand it now? So you must have an interest in what you are insuring. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. See you next time. Bye-bye.